You went there. You've grown up around it. You understand the ins and outs of LSU. So when you heard last night that Brian Kelly was fired, the initial reaction was?
As a fan, relief, hope, optimism. Allow me to put my purple and gold tinted glasses on for a minute and be a fanalist. Because the Brian Kelly experience had run its course. And look, you see 34 and 14. You're probably thinking to yourself, what in the world? Why is that not good enough? It was playoff or bust this season. And this team, after getting splattered at home at night against Texas A&M, I think was the perfect example of how this LSU team was a very, very far cry from the college football playoff. Look, I don't want to play revisionist history and act like the Brian Kelly era at LSU was an abject disaster. Because it wasn't. Brian Kelly won 10 games in back-to-back seasons, 9 games the year after. He beat Nick Saban in Alabama in year 1, won the SEC West in year 1, and went to the SEC Championship in year 1. Jaden Daniels won the Heisman Trophy in year 2. The LSU had the #1 offense in the country in year 2. But I think the entire story of the Brian Kelly era at LSU is lack of complementary football. And I think you can talk about that as a microcosm in single game, and you can zoom out and look at that as the entire tenure. In year 1, LSU was pretty solid. Special teams was atrocious. Special teams mistake cost them at least 2 games, if not more, in that first year. In year 2, I mentioned Jaden Daniels, Heisman Trophy winner, #1 offense in the country. That offense looks reminiscent of Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and Justin Jefferson in 2019, but statistically, the worst defense in the history of the LSU football. Just let that sink in for a second. In year 3, the defense still struggled even when Garrett Nussmeier threw for 4,000 yards. Then in year 4, they invested so much money in the transfer portal to bolster up that defense, but they didn't do enough offensively. And they didn't invest enough in the offensive line to protect Garrett Nussmeier. And that's why you're seeing such an apathetic offense that you've seen so far this year. So it just, a day late, dollar short, couldn't put all of the pieces together. And in year 4, all of the pieces needed to be together with the amount of resources invested into that program. Brian Kelly didn't construct a roster good enough to compete. Brian Kelly didn't construct a coaching staff good enough to compete. And overall, I think the most damning thing about the Brian Kelly experience was on full display on Saturday night. Brian Kelly had a 20-1 record at home at night. Death Valley at night, that means something. I know I'm biased, I know I'm a fan, but you would be hard-pressed to find a more intimidating and terrifying environment for a visiting team than Death Valley at night. It is loud, it is rowdy, it is crowded, it reeks of liquor in that environment. That is an environment that should scare opposing fans. But on Saturday night, Texas A&M fans were throwing a party in Death Valley. But Texas A&M fans came in Yo Trap and took over Yo Trap. They were playing the alma mater. That Texas A&M fans were taking over the LSU student section. That doesn't happen at LSU. And I think it was the perfect example of how LSU lost its edge. LSU lost its toughness. A program in LSU, even if they weren't consistently winning national championships, LSU was consistently a tough and physical and nasty team to play. And LSU football lost that. A lot of people talk about how Brian Kelly wasn't a good culture fit at LSU. Well, I mean, Nick Saban's from West Virginia and came to LSU from Michigan State. Well, Les Miles is from Ohio and came to LSU from Oklahoma State. I don't need you to speak Cajun French and love gumbo in order to be a quote-unquote culture fit at LSU. Okay, culture at LSU is winning. If you win at LSU, it doesn't matter where you're from, or where you came from. All that matters is winning. The quote-unquote culture fit that was a mismatch was the culture of LSU football. That the culture of LSU football went from tough and nasty and representing the state of Louisiana to being soft and listless, and that logo on their helmet not meaning nearly as much as it should.
Caroline, I don't think culture, we talk a lot about culture. I don't think culture is about where you're from. It's about embracing where you're at and doing it the right way that honors the area that you're in. I was lucky enough in my life, I would say now, to live all over the country, growing up all over the country. And when you move from one coast to the other, the first thing you have to do is figure out, where do I fit in? Who am I in this environment? And sometimes, as much as we've made about things like family and we make about dancing around, like all of that, I don't care about that. And I don't think most athletes care about any of that. It's about, do you try to establish relationships with people? Are you doing it in a way that resonates with people? Are you doing the right things for the right people in the culture that you're in? Like, those are all basic things. And there are certain times that people come into the culture and we worry about whether they're a culture fit, thinking about where they're from. And I think it's more about, are you embracing where you're at? And are you putting yourself in that culture? Or are you trying to say that you stand above that culture? It just felt like there was a disconnect from Brian Kelly and the entire LSU program. And it's why the old Henry Kissinger quote, whatever must happen ultimately should happen immediately. Like, there was this sense of, this is going to happen. So when is it going to happen? Because it just felt like this thing has been rocking uneasily for a long time. And that's where I think sort of the injustice to LSU here is. Like, at some point, LSU has to look around and say, do we have the right guy? Do we have the right guy to help us win championships? Do we have the right guy to be our culture? But do we have the person that can make the most of the opportunities that are here? And the minute they figured they didn't have that anymore, it just felt like this was all dead man walking throughout the course of the season. They've underperformed. And for context, I mean, this was a highly regarded football team coming into it. And as we stand right now in the AP poll and in the coaches poll, as whatever weight you want to put in those, they got about as many votes in those polls as James Madison did this week. That's how bad it's gotten for LSU. That I can say LSU and James Madison are side by side in the others receiving votes column of the AP and the coaches poll tells you just
It's
how
disgusting.
damn bad it has gone for LSU. You knew it. That at some point you just knew that Brian Kelly wasn't going to survive this, because it didn't feel like he wanted to, and it didn't feel like he cared, and like there was a connective tissue to this that just felt like the worse it got, the more it was like, oh, I'm separating myself from it, and that's just never the way you're going to win.
It felt phony. And in a place like that, especially a place like that with culture as strong as LSU, if you are phony and if you aren't absolutely head over heels in love and invested into what this program can offer you, it becomes really clear and really obvious. And I think you can go back to the beginning of Brian Kelly's tenure, people that were so important to the fabric and to the DNA of this LSU football program. Tommy Moffitt is one of them. He was the strength and conditioning coach in 2003 under Nick Saban when LSU won a national championship. In 2007 under Les Miles when LSU won a national championship. And 2019 under Ed Orgeron when LSU won a national championship. And that was one of the first things that Brian Kelly did, was move on and part ways with Tommy Moffitt. And if you understand LSU football, you understand how important that man is to that program. So that felt like a misstep. Tommy Moffitt gets a job at Texas A&M to be their strength and conditioning coach. And Tommy Moffitt said he brought a tackling dummy with Brian Kelly's face on it to practice this past week. And what did you see this past week? A tough and physical and nasty Texas A&M football team that played like LSU football used to play. Corey Raymond, a defensive backs coach, who is really kind of the author of DBU, the moniker that LSU so proudly had for so many years. Brian Kelly didn't even reach out to Corey Raymond in the beginning of his tenure. So Corey Raymond looked around and said, okay, I guess I'll just go to Florida then. That Brian Kelly didn't make a conscious effort to connect with the people on his staff, to the people of Louisiana. That there were a lot of reports coming out that the first couple of weeks that Brian Kelly got to LSU, he just didn't connect with people, didn't reach out to people, didn't even have conversations with people on his staff. That is so anti everything that LSU football represents. And so it just kind of felt like it was a very odd start that kind of maybe was a foreshadowing of what was to come. But at the end of the day, the most important thing at LSU is winning, is playing tough, is playing physical, is being in the national conversation. And LSU was so far from that when they got out-toughed and out-physicaled by Vanderbilt. Now, there's a really big discussion, big decision now looming over Scott Woodward, the athletic director at LSU, and the powers that be at LSU of who's going to come in next. When the expectation is college football playoff and national championships, who is the right guy to do that? I think that if you're Scott Woodward, the AD at LSU, you call Nick Saban. You call Nick Saban, you make Nick Saban tell you no. You throw him a bag, you say, what will it take to get you here? His answer will probably be no, but you have to make the call. You have to make the call to Dan Lanning at Oregon. Hilariously and ironically, you have to make the call to Marcus Freeman at Notre Dame. You make those guys tell you no. And the answer will probably be no. I think within the realm of possibility, names like Lane Kiffin, John Sumrall at Tulane, Brent Key at Georgia Tech, Joe Brady, the offensive coordinator in Buffalo, who was a big part of LSU's success in 2019, Kenny Dillingham at Arizona State. You look at some of these young up and comers, maybe these coordinators that are on the path to becoming the next head coach. I think all of those names will be thrown around. Eli Drinkwitz at Missouri is another one. All of those names will be thrown around. But if you're LSU, if you're Florida, if you're Penn State, any of these openings, you have to ask yourself, who's the guy that isn't just going to win the press conference, but is going to win me a national championship? Who cares about winning the press conference? LSU did that. USC did that when they hired Lincoln Riley, and Florida State did that when they hired Mike Norvell. How's that going? Find the guy who's going to win you games.